Comprehension is definitely the most complicated of the cognitive processes that we try to develop in school. I try to think of it like building a structure, and researchers sometimes call it a text model. And that really helps me because I feel like it helps me conceptualize that we have building materials that we have to organize and that it's very complicated. Actually, some of the materials come from the text, from the author's words, and in children's picture books from the wonderful illustrations that are provided to guide the text model. But a lot of the rest of the building blocks come from the child's mind, their background knowledge about the world, their specific knowledge about the word meanings that the author has chosen for the text, and their knowledge of strategies to actually make all those things work together, to build the text model. Comprehension's a really active, interactive process where the child's creating a coherent version of the text in his or her mind. I used to not be able to think of it that way. I used to think comprehension was finding answers in the text, but that's really not true.
Well, where do the breakdowns occur?
I think they can occur in any one of those processes. So it could be that the breakdown occurs because the child's knowledge of the world is inconsistent with the world knowledge that the author expected the child to bring. That's one way. Could be at the level of the words. Maybe the child's vocabulary knowledge is inconsistent with the choices that the author made in constructing the text. It could be general language knowledge. I mean, English syntax is complex, and sometimes children don't have the syntactic knowledge to understand. Could be that they don't have enough strategies to make all of those processes work together. Any one of those could be a potential breakdown, and I don't think we don't have a developmental model to really guide thinking about comprehension. We have to think of it much more interactively.
Well, it is complex. What does research tell us about teaching comprehension?
Each of those processes can be taught. The good news is each of those particular potential breakdown areas can be developed. You can teach kids word meanings before they read, and that'll help them comprehend. You can teach them text structures that help them sort of make sense of all of these different components. For example, you could teach them how stories work. You could teach them how different kinds of information texts tend to work. What are the sort of rules of a story? You could teach kids to make inferences and to really be more active when they read. And you can teach them comprehension strategies, specific procedures that they can use before, during, and after reading to make that text model a little bit more coherent.
That's a lot for a child and a teacher to do. When should teachers start working on comprehension? I mean, should kindergarten teachers be doing it?
I really think kindergarten teachers should be doing it. I worked with some really fantastic school staffs that have really organized the whole reading program around comprehension strategies, and we came up with an interesting little way to remember them. At Johnson School in Charlottesville, Virginia, teachers helped construct an acronym, PICTURE, to identify what cognitive strategies we want kids to use and to remind teachers to teach them and to remind children to use them. And we made bookmarks and posters and all kinds of things to infuse that notion into the school life. And here they are. And people will call them slightly different names, but I think we would find them very consistent. The P in PICTURE stands for predict. Take information from the text and information from background knowledge to make a reasonable guess at what might happen next, especially in a story. The second one was imagine or visualize. Really take background knowledge to create a coherent mental image to bring to bear background knowledge to fill in what the author has left out in the text. Clarify. I think this one's the hardest, but actually make sure you're making sense. Stop and make sure that the building that you're building is standing up. Be metacognitive and reflective. T. T stands for try in our acronym, and it was try to ask yourself how and why questions to keep that inference building going. U is use what you know, and it seems odd, but children sometimes don't know, especially young children or novice comprehenders, that you're allowed to use background knowledge. Because they might answer a question and say, it doesn't say, the book doesn't say, when in fact the answer was right there in their heads. Review, summarize. During and after reading, good readers stop and summarize and check and make sure that what they're making in their head makes sense, and then evaluate. to what extent did this text actually meet my reading purposes? How is it connected to other texts? How can I talk about it with other readers? So all of those things actually can be begun in kindergarten.
So we should remember picture. What are the characteristics of a classroom where the teacher is doing a good job teaching comprehension? Can you paint a picture of such a classroom for us?
They're filled with language. You can't teach comprehension quietly. Teachers are talking, children are talking. There's wonderful books being read that are complex contexts for comprehension. You can't teach comprehension in a very, very simple book. You have to have something that actually has some meat to it. Teachers are actually modeling thinking, which is the hardest thing about teaching comprehension, making that thinking verbal and accessible to the kids. And the kids are asking questions of the teacher, of the text, and of one another. So they're noisy places.
Well, should comprehension instruction be connected across grade levels? Is there a school you've worked with where you found that's happened well?
Yeah, well, that at Johnson Elementary School and then at Jackson Via Elementary School, I was lucky enough to work with teachers who were willing to say, okay, we'll try it. We'll try it K through 5. We'll try it in read-alouds and in reading instruction. And they use that acronym PICTURE to organize their work, but there's many other ways to do that. I think core program materials often have a simple set of strategies that they ask teachers to use across the elementary grades.
Why do we see drop-off in comprehension skills as kids go into the 4th and 5th grades?
You know, I don't think of it that way as drop-off. I think we have to remember that the tasks that we're asking children to complete in 4th and 5th grade are different. Oftentimes, we're asking them to read much more dense information text, and we're asking them to read in areas for which they have no background knowledge. They're reading in order to build background knowledge. So, of course, it could be that they have word recognition problems. It could be that they have fluency problems, but it also could be that the task is just much more difficult, and sometimes we're not providing enough support for them before, during, and after reading to really help.
Well, since we know this challenging period might come, what can teachers do to help kids make it through this period?
Well, teachers in the elementary grades can do a really careful job making sure children know how to decode easily and well. They can give them enough practice reading that their reading sounds like oral language, what we call fluent reading. And then we can provide support. We can build vocabulary and concept knowledge. We can teach children comprehension strategies, and we can help them to apply them many, many, many times in many, many texts in flexible ways. And we can give them lots of chances to interact with teachers and texts and with one another.
Dr. Beck, you've listened to all this, you've taught all this, you've experienced all this. What are some good ways the teacher can assess a child's level of comprehension?
A very simple way, by asking the child to tell her or him, what was that all about? And when you get to a part that the teacher's not sure whether the child understood it or not, by saying, can you tell me more about when Charlie had a headache? And so what you do is ask the child to tell you what they understood from the text, and you can certainly learn a great deal about whether they're comprehending it or not. It's my favorite way.
It's your favorite way.
Just ask them. Don't make it complicated.
That's a simple instruction, hard to carry out for some teachers maybe. Nancy, what should a teacher who's assessing a child with dyslexia for comprehension skills expect to see in that child?
Typically what we do is look at language processing as a spectrum. So we would see students who are possibly dyslexic. That would be on this side of the spectrum where they're having decoding problems. Or we would see students on that spectrum that might be having difficulty with comprehension. For example, if it's the dyslexic student that we're looking at, and we're looking at their oral vocabulary and their language, oral language processing, and their decoding, their word attack skills, very often for those students we see that they have high vocabulary or higher vocabulary than their decoding ability, and they frequently have higher comprehension ability than their decoding ability. And so we're looking at a range of skills that would let us see the whole child.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. Now let's take a look at comprehension instruction in action. Here's third grade teacher Robert Vitisse and his class in Harlem.
So you've seen people play checkers before? Wow.
At Community School 200, Robert Vitisse helps his third graders discuss complicated narratives. He uses a program called the Theme Scheme, designed for struggling readers.
What I like most about the theme scheme is the general map that it gives students to read a story with.
With comprehension programs like the Theme Scheme, I think what we're really trying to do is have children move up in their basic thinking skills, because reading is, in fact, thinking. We don't want children just to be able to read very fluently off the printed page but not understand what they're reading. It kind of sounds good, but they're not really getting the point.
A long time ago in China, there was a boy named Ping.
The Theme Scheme focuses not only on plot, but as its name implies, on the underlying theme of a story.
We've always chosen stories that have good, clear, accessible themes. It's very, very important in instruction to really show the children something that they can, in fact, get.
When Ping received his seed from the emperor, he was the happiest child of all.
To find a successor, the emperor gives seeds to many children. But only Ping is honest enough to admit his seed won't grow.
So who's going to be the new emperor? 1, 2, 3? Ping! Very good. Ping is going to be the new emperor. Why is Ping going to be the new emperor? Amable?
Because maybe he told the truth.
Interesting.
We just don't teach stories so that kids understand those stories. We want them to do a little more and go into another level of comprehension, which is, in fact, theme comprehension. Stories have messages for us. They have lessons sometimes. They relate to other stories, and most important, they relate to real life.
Now, in the story, it was really hard for Ping to be honest.
The Theme Scheme challenges students to find echoes of the story's theme in their own lives.
Has anybody ever had a time when it was hard to be honest in their lives? Elizabeth?
When I was washing the dishes and I was drying, it was a glass cup, and it just fell, and the handle broke, and it was hard to tell my grandmother.
So when you look at reading and its complexity, you're looking at this integration of a number of fairly complex cognitive and linguistic skills. They got to know sounds. They got to link sounds to letters. They got to rapidly apply all of this to a whole page of print. And then as they're reading, they have to structure themselves. They've got to ask questions about what they're reading. They've got to summarize as they go along. They've got to predict what's coming next. All of that goes into comprehension.
I told her, and then she just told me to throw it in the garbage and get mad.
The Theme Scheme has made for richer discussion in Mr. Vitisse's class. And studies show that kids who use this program do better on comprehension tests.
Comprehension is the end goal of all reading instruction, really. And we train phonics, we train phonemic awareness, we give children lots of practice so they become very fluent in reading, but it's all in the pursuit of one goal, to get the meaning off the printed page.
Dr. Beck, the word connections comes up a lot in your work, and we just saw kids making connections between a story and their own lives. What kind of connections do you hope children will make as they read?
I think a major connection that they need to make is to connect parts of a text as they're going along. Sharon talked about the need to build a coherent representation of what one reads, and that's exactly right. You can't remember or understand a basket of facts or a basket of sentences. What you need to do is be able to connect one sentence to the next, one part to the next, or part that you're reading to what you read earlier. For instance, if you're reading about someone who was yawning and rubbing his eyes in a peculiar situation where one shouldn't be tired, then the teacher might say, now how does this connect to what we read before? And sure enough, on the previous page, he had not been able to sleep well. So that's an important connection to make. And kids need to be encouraged to do that. How does this connect to how the mother felt about it? That's the way of building this connected representation so that what you remember is coherent rather than just a basket of facts.
Well, beyond encouraging, how do you teach children to make these connections?
Well, I think I wouldn't underestimate encouraging. I would say it by saying you need to encourage them by asking them to do it time and time and time again. And I think what's particularly important is that kids and the teacher work through texts with kids. They read a part of it and then they talk about it. And what they talk about ought to be aspects of the text that connect it up so that they bring it together. So how does that connect with what we read before? Does that connect with something we read in the earlier chapter? I mean, that's an important idea too, especially when you're into content area books. So you just keep asking them to do it.